Hi, this is Dan Schneider with Still New York, where we interview some industry experts and friends and advisors about their relationship with the greatest city in the world, New York City. Today we have advisor Trey Mia. Trey started his career over 10 years ago as an MTV award-winning writer-producer for Creative Excellence, as the founder of Infinity Films for the Duck PSA on racial tolerance. The PSA was also part of an exhibit at the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles. Infinity Film's second project, Night of the Cicada, an hour-long drama, was showcased on PBS Independent Images nationwide. It launched the directing career of internationally acclaimed master painter Bo Bartlett. At VH1, Trey was responsible for crafting strategic brand messages for the Big Six Studios film and TV promotions, generating millions in revenue. He also developed original programming to build the network's new brand initiatives at VH1 Classic. As a strategy director, Trey has shaped brand creative for major rebranding campaigns for top global corporations, including Absolute Vodka, Credit Suisse, Broadridge Financial, and the New York Choral Society. And separately, as a professional screenwriter, Trey has developed scripted and non-scripted projects for HBO, VH1, ABC, and Showtime. At HBO, Trey worked with the late Stanley Crouch, America's preeminent writer and co-founder of Jazz at Lincoln Center, to adapt his book Kansas City Lightning: The Rise and Times of Charlie Parker into an 8-hour drama miniseries. So without further ado, here is Trey Mia. Trey, welcome to Still New York. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for having me.
So today we are exploring the question of what brings people to New York from all over the world, what has made it the cultural capital of the world, and will it be able to recover after the pandemic, and if so, how? So, so let me ask, when did you first come to New York City, and what drew you there?
Well, I remember it vividly. It was March the 25th, 1996, when I officially had moved up here from Philadelphia after years living post college. And so at the time, I was doing some PR for a Japanese kind of design firm, fashion and lifestyle called Not Even the Rain. So they had a fashion show in Tribeca. And so it was just very nice after the show. I officially did not have to take the train back to Philadelphia. And the reason why I came up here was I think the reason why most people come to New York is that they can really express themselves and work with some very talented, people.
Yeah, it's the economies of agglomeration. All the creatives want to be with each other. Is that it?
Yeah, I think that's a large part of it. And I think because New York culturally has just had a history of being more open as far as a tolerance to a range of different social behaviors than other parts of the country. So I think it's economic and social. I think there's several different drivers for the city, and so economic and social are key ones, as well as entertainment and basically career. And so they all kind of overlap. But I think with New York, it's a place where you can really explore yourself and learn a lot about yourself because things are done differently here than they are done in other parts of the country. The old saying that, New York quality or the stamp of New York is synonymous with quality. It's historically been a place where at a sophisticated level, no matter what industry that you're in, that level of sophistication will be on display here in New York and how people do business.
The bar is much higher, in other words. There's a higher expectation. Is that it?
Yeah, yeah, definitely a higher expectation. And I think a lot of New Yorkers know that as well. And so it will be interesting to see how COVID and post COVID, the political and economic structures that we will navigate, a new beginning for New York.
Mhm. And uh, When you first came to New York, what were your initial reactions and experiences, if you recall?
Um, I think for me, somebody had told me that it really takes a person about 2 years to really kind of settle into the pace in New York. And I didn't really believe it coming from living in Philadelphia, a city, albeit, smaller, but in an urban environment. But I think that was the thing that I really had to get used to, was kind of just the pace and the energy here.
Hmm.
And so that's what I remember most. I think the other thing I remember about moving up here to New York is this was before 1998, when you started to see a lot of explosion of banks on every corner. Um, I felt that New York, the social nightlife was just a little bit more open because we didn't have a lot of technology. When people went out, it was a lot easier to really strike up conversations with people and talk to people, because people are not engrossed in their digital technology, or kind of clustered in groups. And then within that, they're on their digital technology.
Yeah, I remember those days before cell phones.
Yeah. More spontaneous, I would say.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think also just seeing so many big box stores coming into New York as well, and smaller businesses losing some of that, local flavor and character.
Hmm. Yeah,
That's
it has
yeah,
changed.
that's what I see.
It has changed a lot since then. A lot more gentrification in the last 25 years. A lot more expensive. Uh, there's been, well, what other changes have you seen since 1996?
Well, I think the biggest thing was I kind of moved in at just at the beginning of the exodus of creatives pretty much into Brooklyn. And so what I have seen is a shift where basically in the late 90s, early 2000s, places that I would go to for entertainment or, relaxing downtown, those places really are not there anymore. And so it's been taken over by, pretty much a very different, culture of people, basically, that are more, middle America oriented, and
Hmm.
they're kind of in the city, and it's a big adventure for them, but they're not really urbanites as far as or urbane as far as their mentality or sensibilities.
Hmm. And do you think that was a function of the affordability of rents, or what factors led to that transition?
Well, I think part of it is just we're living in a different, time now. Things, change. But I do think part of it is that, um, yeah, exactly. The rents have really gone up. So you really only have a certain profile of a person that can really afford to live in Manhattan now, or at least lower Manhattan, and definitely East Village.
Mhm.
And so, um,
Is that
a
where
lot,
is
I
that where
think.
you lived at the time when you first came to New York, in the East
No,
Village?
I lived in West Village, right by the Waverly Inn and Bank
Ah.
in Waverly. I had a studio there for the longest time. And
Hmm.
so that was, a period when, actually, speaking of, now that I thought, West Village used to be open until like 4 o'clock in the morning, basically. Now, I mean, even post COVID, for several years before that, it would basically close down at around like 11 p.m. Basically, things would start to shut down. So that's, what I start to see is really this city kind of shutting down a little bit, um, in that sense, not being very much the 24-hour city that it used to be.
Hmm. Yeah, the city that never sleeps, so to speak,
Yeah,
right?
so to say. Yeah.
So, well, maybe that could have been a function of the demographics. The people moving in may have been older and don't stay out as late. I know I don't stay out as late anymore than when I was younger, um, because of the rents being so high. That I know a lot of young creatives who were pushed out of Manhattan into the outer boroughs, into the suburbs because they couldn't afford the rents. So
Right.
maybe that's a reason that it didn't stay didn't stay open as late.
Yeah, and that's exactly what the point, that I mean is that, all the creatives that have had those types of, lifestyles, where, it's a little bit later into the evening, they have left for Brooklyn. And so out of places like West Village, so to say.
Right.
So
Williamsburg in particular has become the new hipster haven in
yeah,
Brooklyn and
yeah.
other parts of Brooklyn. It's more expensive in Brooklyn now than Manhattan for the most part.
Yes, exactly. I've read a New York Times article saying that, I think it was about 2 years ago, which was very interesting. So, that's real estate, as we know, is a big driver of the city. And so the problem is, as far as I see, with real estate, is that, these types of plans are for development are done like 10 years out, basically. And so um, the real estate industry, to me, to my knowledge, doesn't seem to be an industry that's very forward thinking in the sense of the totality of how, their product really serves the community.
Mhm.
And so, I understand, that they want to have a return on investment, and rightly they should. But I think time will tell where, information is coming out. It seems like that, there were just a lot of things that they could have really avoided, to really kind of shield themselves, even with COVID, basically, because these people have been given a lot of, tax incentives. And, you know, isn't there any type of, don't they put any type of money into type of savings or insurance for catastrophic things, that happen like this? And so, um, I think, that's going to really have a big effect on whether New York can really survive, basically, is if they can really put together a comprehensive plan that really serves the community, instead of really placing a lot of big box type of office spaces or retail spaces that really extract money from the community.
Yeah, you make a good point. The timeline for real estate development is longer term. They're looking out 10 years, especially if they're assembling a development.
Sure.
So there's
Yeah.
product that's coming onto the market now that was planned 10 years ago. And
Right.
now there's so much vacant space, particularly in office buildings, with all these companies that are either going remote or hybrid. And it's going to be hard to really get people back into the offices. A lot of workers don't want to come back. A lot of companies don't want them to come back. They're looking to cut their overhead. So I guess that's a question of how can the revenue people have a lot of fixed costs. They have overhead like real estate taxes. They have maintenance, and if they're not collecting rents, what's going to happen to these big commercial buildings and new residential developments? What do you think is going to happen?
I don't know, Dan, but you brought up a point about, as we both know, that these, offices and developments are planned 10 years out. But the problem really is the culture of how people think in real estate. And like I said, it's not really forward thinking. I mean, well over 10 years, there was data enough to support that, the growth in, tech companies and companies of employees of 25, employees of less, will become more prevalent,
Mhm.
in our economy, and that they would need less office space, and that they would be more mobile as we shift from a service economy to a more information based economy. But they really just ignore that information. So again, it's really their fault for not really looking at the totality of everything and just looking at their own bottom, line, and not really serving the total needs of everyone. So, that said, we're in a conundrum where they're going to have to give up something. I think, there's plenty of stories where, different companies, are suing different tenants for, back rent, um, because, instead of negotiating with them, they want the full rent. And so everybody's going to have to take something, take one for the team.
Take a
And
haircut.
so, yeah, take a haircut. And so the only thing that I can really think of is, different ways of looking at how these projects are financed. Instead of if a company that comes in, let's say Amazon, they're getting $9 billion in tax rebates. Well, that should be looked at as a loan. So once they start generating money and taxes over the 30 or 40 or 50 years or whatever that they're here, that they're paying that back, and that money is going into the community, on one level. And so that's a different way of financing, but we need to start thinking about different ways how these projects are financed.
Good,
Um,
good point. Good point. Well, there's a mayorality race going on. At the primary for the Democratic Party is in June of this year, only a couple of months away. I think it's at this point 3 months away,
mhm.
and or even less, maybe 2 months away. And there are candidates such as Andrew Yang, who are running on not only a platform of universal basic income, but a people's bank. So creating a bank that is not just profit motivated, but looking at the human element and the social costs. So is that something that you think is possible to create a people's bank, which
Well,
is
yeah, they're already here and they've been here for decades. It's called community banks. But what happened is, as you know, once the Glass-Steagall Act, changed everything back in the 80s, separating, commercial and retail banking, that a lot of conglomeration, was ushered in. And so a lot of community banks, really suffered, because they were bought out. And so the community banks that still operate, and also different type of trade union banks that are existing, they serve the needs of community. I don't really see a need to create yet another form of, a financial institution where we have institutions working here. And I understand that from Andrew Yang's point of view, which is another side note, which goes back to the culture of real estate, where the thinking needs to be more humanistic and human centric as far as solving problems. Um, Andrew Yang seems nice, but the problem I have with him and most people that come from this background that are technologists, their solution for something is just more technology.
Mhm.
And so they really kind of overlook really the human, aspect of, and the behavioral aspect of how these things can be implemented, and how these um, new initiatives really affect people on a behavioral level.
Mhm.
For an example, like with a lot of the kids being home in New York right now, or having been home from COVID, um, I think De Blasio wanted to consult with one of the chief executives from Google, about setting up a mechanism where all the kids can learn remotely. Well, I mean, they didn't even consult with, the Board of Education. They didn't even consult with different learning psychologists about different needs, because not all kids, learn the same. Some have disabilities, but at a very basic level, no one even thought to think like, oh, well, every kid in New York doesn't have, digital access, internet access. And so there's a disconnect.
Mhm.
And so that's the problem that I see with potentially with Andrew Yang is, let's create more technology things as solutions and not coming from a human centric and human design point of view, if you know what I mean.
Right. Well, Dan Doctoroff, who was the former deputy mayor under Bloomberg, and then
Mhm.
former chairman or CEO of Bloomberg Enterprises, is now the founder and CEO of Sidewalk Labs, which is owned by Google or Alphabet,
Right.
and he is a big pro-growth proponent, that New York has to keep growing and keep building and more construction. And doesn't that seem a little outdated at this point, since there's so much vacant property in New York? I mean, and yeah, that's a
Well,
technological fix that he's talking about, is to keep building and build it and they will come. But who could afford those buildings, and how is that going to serve the community, as you would say, the people who can't afford it, that are sort of the left behinds in New York?
yeah, it's the same thing that what's the gentleman who is behind Tesla? I forgot his name.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I know who you mean.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
We'll fill in the
yeah.
blank. We'll fill in the blank.
Yeah, fill in the blank. Yeah, like yeah, I can see his face. But anyway, he was talking about artificial intelligence, and he was saying how he was even scared and thought that was the biggest threat to our society and civilization as humans. And he had said the problem is that the people creating the AI do not think that the mechanism of AI can really turn itself against us, meaning humans, that there's a blind spot in their thinking. And so that's what I see with, and I think a lot of young people, and I just think people in America see with our politicians is there's a blind spot in how they really view America. I mean, you have Mitch McConnell really thinking that people are very lazy in America and blind to the fact that people are really starving and hurting in America, across the board, across all economies. And to really say that is a disconnect. And I think also with what you were saying about build it and they will come, that type of philosophy, well, what is that really based on? Because, unfortunately, the millennial generation, once they graduate, has come out into really some of the worst economic times and events basically that's stunting their potential for any type of growth to approach wealth. That's just a fact. And so who's going to rent all this office space? Who's going to buy more luxury goods basically?
Mhm. Yeah, I think.
We've just kind of reached a breaking point, I think, and COVID has really exacerbated that. Let's put it this way, Dan. How many people are in the New York metropolitan area? What I think it's what about like 15 million, I think.
Yes, approximately. Yeah.
Yeah, 15 million. And so if the headlines or news are really barking about a half million people that have left Manhattan, and there's a big brouhaha about it, and that has affected our economy, then that really shows you the stark inequitable distribution of wealth in this country, because it shouldn't be that way. Basically, there's plenty of people left in New York. You know, the problem is that one, the economic drivers of tourism is kind of shut down because of limited travel, basically. But a half a million people should not be dictating the economy for everyone. but it's just a parallel to the bigger economy where you have, like you say, 1% of the people that control, the last I checked with statistics, 40% of the wealth in this country.
Mhm. No, I think a lot of people agree with you. And I think that tourism, New York City has depended on tourism for the last 20 years since, you moved there, and even well, that's 25 years. But I mean, the last 25 years, they intentionally tried to create a tourism industry. And now that there is no tourism, so many people, including hospitality industry, restaurants, bars, theaters, are all suffering, and all the arts workers that are affiliated with them. And so it's questionable whether or not or how soon tourists might come back, and it might take 3 or 4 or 5 years, especially international tourists. Now, they say that the domestic tourists might come back first, especially once they have vaccine passports and safe opening. Um, but I think that it's part of the same problem of a lack of planning, as you mentioned with the real estate industry. Um, they weren't planning for a 100-year pandemic, and they weren't planning for the abrupt halt of tourism, which was the driver to such a big part of the New York City economy. And as you said, also it's a transition from the service economy to the information economy. So now you don't have to be in New York City. You could be anywhere in the world and have a New York City presence or artificial presence. And so it's people don't really know. But how do you think? And I see another problem. Uh, the problem is the people who couldn't afford to stay in New York. You're talking about the 1% or the 2% who moved out maybe to their country home or upstate New York or to the Hamptons, or Connecticut or Florida. But what about the young people who were struggling in the arts or in hospitality or both, and they had to give up their apartment and move back home with their parents or to a cheaper location somewhere else in the country? How do we bring those people back, those creatives, the young creatives who couldn't afford to stay in New York? What will that take?
Well, I think what that would take is really boosting small businesses because statistics show that really I think it's about like 90%, close to 90% of the people employed in New York are employed by small businesses. Those 50 employ 50 employees and under, and so that type of vitality um, will help restore the because New York really has different several tiers of economies, uh, and so right now, basically, when you have a lot of low wage types jobs and middle tier, I would say professional jobs that are kind of have left or are sized down, or with the professional jobs you can work remotely. It's going to be a matter of really, you know, uh, will New York be able to live up to socially what it was post COVID? What does that look like now? And my theory is this: is that that because you have a certain class, professional class of people that will be working remotely at home and during the day, that'll create different demands for real estate in New York. And so that's going to be up to different landlords to really accommodate those different types of architectural changes. But I think that class of people will go out in the evening, and that also that nightlife in New York might be extended to be a little bit longer because with these people having the flexibility to work during at any time during the day, basically will allow them to extend their entertainment hours in the evening. And so I think if we start to see some signs of that in the sense that rents are more hospitable, but then there's the issue of jobs and growth. And therein lies the broader economy, which is, with 40% of the wealth being concentrated at the top, a lot of small businesses still very struggling with capital, basically. And so a lot of jobs that are really created are really low wage jobs. And so that's really a problem. Um,
That was also part of the creating a tourist industry, because most of those workers are not blue collar, which was manufacturing workers, and they're not white collar, which are the professionals. Those are service workers, which are low wage, non union, and that's what has been created over the last 25 years. And those are the people who are really struggling without tourism. And so, is it, I think it really calls for better planning, which New York and the rest of the United States has never really embraced urban planning. And, as you said, an industrial policy, like what are these jobs going to be? What are we going to manufacture um, that is going to be good for the environment and that is going to be, good for people? So some people have been talking about creating a new WPA type program, and with the new Biden infrastructure proposal that just is coming about for another, I think it's $2 billion for infrastructure to rebuild the roads and the bridges and the mass transit. That's reminiscent of the WPA during the Great Depression. And so, how do you see that possibly helping?
well, again, I think it's another fine example of, you know, driving, looking through the rearview mirror and trying to recycle an idea. The reality is that as it stands in 2021, there is a labor shortage of craftsmen. Um, I just saw something recently on the BBC talking about plumbers, electricians, and that there's a shortage of them in America, and that they cannot recruit, a young, workforce because they simply, the young boys today do not simply want to do this type of manual labor.
Or
And
girls,
so,
or girls. Don't forget the girls. You know,
okay, all right, well, it's traditionally, yeah, you're right, or girls,
women. Yeah, there's a labor
or
shortage.
young ladies. And so, so yeah, it's a great idea in that, things need to be, done. But what I really don't see is changes in, how our educational system is really being approached. Um, to really solve this problem, Dan, to be honest with you, is, all government workers should be treated like basically private, employees, like in standard, corporate environments where you could be terminated at any time and based on your, performance. The problem is that we have a lot of civil servants, particularly at the state and local level, which, that, ties into a lot of problems with people not, doing their jobs, and that really affects the quality of life in New York. And so that plays a big part in, the rents of New York, desirable neighborhoods, and just the quality of life. And young people really look at that as well.
So you're saying that government workers should be privatized. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't
What about the
that
police and the fire department? And
yeah, that what I'm saying is the culture of, having civil servants, um, and that being tenure for a lot of people that are performing their jobs that are not up to snuff.
what about
That
teachers? Teachers are the biggest unions in New York, I think, they're
teachers are the biggest unions, or yeah, I mean,
nationally. So are they,
yeah, yeah. The same thing. I mean, you have a lot of hardworking, dedicated, teachers, but I'm sure that we just need to, with, I think, with everything, start to really get the politics out of everything, and that's really the problem with the thinking of, how we got into this mess, and not planning and really not thinking of things holistically, is, people are just thinking about slice the pie, their own, interests basically.
Well,
And
you
so,
you sent me an interesting article recently from I think it was the New York Magazine about the
uh-huh.
permanent government of New York and how it's historically been dominated by the real estate industry. Could you talk about that a little bit and how that might change if what would be needed to change that?
Well, what I see and took away from the article, Dan, is again, with the culture that I described, now they are put and forced in a position where they have to change. And so now they're saying, well, gee, we really need to make housing that's really affordable. Not with the old game plan where, the 80/20, but even the 20 was out of the reach of most working creative artists. They were still rather expensive. And so they, I think, are probably open right now. At least I would hope so. But I don't really see any forward thinking ideas um, other than, variation of the build it and they will come type of scenario.
Mhm. Well, Ray McGuire, who's a former executive with Citibank, is running for mayor. He's they call him the Black Bloomberg, Harvard undergrad, Harvard Law School, and Harvard Business School. He has proposed building affordable housing for seniors. And, so that is sort of, as you would say, a recycling of an old idea because so many seniors cannot afford the housing in New York City anymore. And that's, I guess, a safe population to help because everybody knows a senior or is a senior and they vote. So that would mean, just another same old, let's build affordable housing for a specific part of the population. Would you think that how are we going to get new ideas? That's the question. How do
Well,
we?
I think new ideas honestly need to come from different segments of the society. And so one society, the thinkers, those are your architects. Um, and like I said, in regards to the problem I have with Andrew Yang is an engineer. Engineers are builders in our society. They really solve problems from a very technical point of view of how to really build an infrastructure, but they're not holistic thinkers. And so I think discussions with, some of the top, futurists, because again, this whole trend towards, the need for less office space, a more mobile workforce, all this information was really out there and available to the real estate, industry well over 15 years ago. But again, they did not take heed. So they kept doing the philosophy of build it and they will come until now nobody can anticipate a global crisis like this, but regardless of COVID, it was just a matter of time before the system really catches up with itself. So I think young people that, and definitely not people coming from Ivy League schools, because the Ivy League, in my experience, is not what the brain used to be, so to say. Um, And so I think, talking to, different thinkers and artists, psychologists, as well as, our technical thinkers to really look at, how this problem can be solved. I think that's what we need to really kind of tap into.
Mhm.
Um,
And
I
then
think also,
who's going to pay for it? That's the question.
huh?
How are we going to pay for it? That's the question because they're already talking about 50% of the New York City budget comes from real estate taxes. And if these commercial landlords go under and can't pay their real estate taxes, then the money has to come from somewhere. And the bailout money is only going to last so long. So we're going to, they,
Yeah, I read another article saying that we're not as in bad shape as we think that we are. And I'll try to get that article to you with the bailout money that we're getting. But yes, the consensus is that we are in a tough pickle. I don't really have the answers, uh, Dan. But what I do know is that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, thinking you'll get a different result.
I love that.
And that's the problem that I see with the culture of the real estate, I guess, magnets, or the way that they think. Um, it's that thinking is really, it seems to be a little bit more antiquated. We have to come at it from different, because there is the capital. We have plenty of capital. It's just a matter of the priorities of where we want to place the capital to get something done. Because there's a lot of ways you can, and this being a lawyer, that you can structure things financially.
Right.
It doesn't have to be actually one particular, way. So if there's, like I said, and giving tax breaks to companies in the past, well, in the past, yeah, they got that as free money, but maybe in the future, those tax breaks are a loan, and that those are factored into a yearly budget over X amount, amortized over X amount of time. Or with all this commercial space, then, what are really the needs right now, um, that are sustainable and that can be invested in, and that, okay, it might not see an immediate return on investment, but, in year 3, year 4, year 5, and looking at that type of planning, as far as a public private, enterprise, I don't know.
Mhm.
I don't know. But one thing I wouldn't be surprised in is if somebody comes in and says, "Oh, that building on 56th Street, let's make that, let's grow marijuana." And that can be repurposed as a place to grow cannabis for the medical, um, and recreational market, as more industry, states come online and, decriminalizing, cannabis. And
Well, yeah, they just
this,
legalized in New
yeah,
York State. It'll probably take effect in about a year after they put together
yeah,
all the
exactly. And
regulations.
so you grow it inside, that creates jobs.
Hmm. Yeah,
You,
that's a different kind of way of thinking, or even creating
it,
vertical farms in some of these
that's what
big
that's the other. Well, that's what I was
grow
getting
your
ready to
own
say. I
fruit.
got the
Yeah.
idea
Hmm.
from vertical farms,
Hmm.
and that would save a lot as far as, like, shipping, vegetables and things in the city, basically. You imagine how many, you know,
We'd
people
also
would,
put
would be
people,
on bicycles,
we'd have to
delivering.
we'd have to train people how to be farmers again, though. That would be part of the retraining, I guess, is,
Part of the
agriculture.
retraining, but not only that, I mean, just think that a lot of gas that is used every day is from deliveries coming over the bridge into Manhattan,
Hmm.
to all the different businesses. So if food production was done in the city, um, then, the carbon footprint would be less, because some of those things could be delivered by men on bicycles with, those large, compartments that they have in the back, where, they can store refrigerated goods and whatnot. Um, or, done by smaller van fleets, that
Hmm.
sort of thing. Um, all over town. And so it creates, you have fresher, vegetables, um,
And
it will help.
marijuana, fresher cannabis, right?
Fresher cannabis, also. Yes, definitely. And so, New York City can become, one of the capital growers for, the rest of the world, basically. And so that's an out of the box thinking. And what I'm saying is those type of ideas come from people, that are thinkers like myself. Um, it's and based on, okay, well, what's a pragmatic need, or what's where's the marketplace going? I definitely think there is something to be said about micro housing, um, which is
In small
interesting.
houses, is that small houses, micro housing?
Yeah, micro housing, small houses, where apartments are kind of similar to the size of apartments in Japan, maybe was it like 300 square feet or something like that. I personally think that's a little bit too small, maybe 400 square feet or something like that. But I definitely think it's an opportunity to build different communities, for people. And so we'll just have to see how the real estate people really respond. But I definitely got from that article I sent you that their back is against the wall. They've been forced to think differently.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
that,
I think.
again, that's because they have a culture where they don't listen. They really don't listen. They just do their own thing.
Mhm.
And
I think
so,
we're one thing's for sure that this is a game changer, as they said, as they
yeah,
say, and it's also we don't know what's going to happen in the future. But I think it's important to come up with, as you're doing, fresh ideas and things that are problem solving, like how do you solve climate change? How do you solve homelessness? How do you solve income inequality? How do you solve crime? And so I think that, encouraging uh, a, a laboratory for fresh ideas is part of it. And New York has so many great educational institutions, colleges and universities. And I think they could become a resource in the future, creating laboratories for all types of things, incubators. And I think we really need to integrate the educational component in everything that we do going forward.
right. Well, it is out there, Dan. There are people working on this. Like, for an example, my friend who I told you I was going, that I will introduce you to, after air, Vanessa Keith. Her company is Studio Tika. She's a Columbia grad, and so she's been working on this issue for years, and with other architects, and they have ideas about creating communities and sustainable, buildings and all of that. The problem is that when they run into, again, dealing with the powers that be in real estate, um, it's hard for them to really kind of wrap their head around it. And so I think now we're at a point where, because of COVID, has just like blindsided everyone, that they're in a position to really start to think like, okay, we have to think of radically different ideas, because the status quo is not going to keep the boat afloat anymore. And
Mhm.
so I think we're all on the same page
Well,
about that.
apropos of that, I think we are considering holding a virtual town hall sometime in May, and love you to be part of that if you're interested and available. And currently, we're looking for some media sponsors and people like your friend Vanessa Keith and others who might be interested in being involved. And trying to come up with some new ideas uh, and new solutions. And so I would love you to come back and be part of that if you're interested. And uh, we will continue the conversation.
Yeah, I definitely think that the conversation needs to be continued. And I think I wanted to thank you for this opportunity, Dan, because I think all of us really need to, uh, during this time, really think about, what our future is, and play an active part in that. And I think that's the other, equation as well. It's, I think a lot of people realize the importance now of, civic, responsibility, you know, particularly in a so-called, democracy, that,
So
which
called.
is, yeah, as we
Yeah.
say, that's another talk show.
No, I agree. I think you're right. I think if anything, this is teaching us that we're all connected and that we are our brother's keeper, and that, that actions have consequences, and we need to be more sensitive to the fact that we are all connected. And New York City is will probably come back, and it will always be the cultural capital of the world, because it is necessary for people, creatives, and entrepreneurs from all over the world to have a place to go and meet each other, and stay up till 4 in the morning and beyond.
Right. Exactly. Well, I'll leave you with this thought, Dan. We, meaning New Yorkers, will figure it out. That's not an issue, because we are New Yorkers. The question is who will figure it out and how will it be implemented? And so therein lies the rub. And so, as we know, there's a cultural tension now between, you know, uh, progressive ideology and, very traditional economic, ways of, doing things in the favor of oligarchs and big businesses. So that's that's food for thought and why I think people need to really get kind of active now,
Hmm. No,
because we don't live in a democracy. We live in a consumer ocracy. And so once people are realizing that, their voting power is what their pocketbook is very
hmm
strong.
hmm yeah,
Believe,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Trey Mia, for being part of this important discussion and conversation. And let's keep those ideas coming, and let's keep the conversation going. So
Thank you, Dan.
thank you very
Thank you, Dan.
much. Stay
All
safe.
right.